Hello, and thank you so much for listening to the Facilities and Focus podcast. My name is Mackenna Moralez, and I am the Associate Editor with FacilitiesNet and also your host. Today, I am joined by Alex Carlson. Alex is the Vice President of Facilities Management Services for Fine-Tune Expense Management, where he oversees all aspects of the company's facilities management offering. Alex has over 14 years worth of executive level facilities management and operations experience. And just thank you so much for joining me today, Alex. How are you?
Well, great to see you, McKenna. Thanks for having me. It's a great day, great to be here, and I've been a avid reader, subscriber of FacilitiesNet for a long time since I've been in facilities. So it's fun to be on the forum. Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness, am I blushing? That's always nice to hear. Um, so today we're going to be talking about the return to office and how very prevalent that is in today's society because 5 years ago, around the time that we are recording, I know that we're kind of in a time machine right now, but for our listeners, we are recording around the 5 year anniversary of the COVID pandemic, or when it was first labeled a pandemic, when so people started working from home 5 years ago today. And now there is this huge push to get people back in the office. Companies are doing it. Even the federal government made that executive order saying that people had to return to the office full time. How can facility managers ease this transition from a technological standpoint?
Yeah, that's a fun question to tear apart right from the beginning, McKenna. I think, well, actually, I'll share a quick secondhand story. So I've got a brother-in-law who's in one of the largest government facilities in the country, and there's 30,000 employees there that have all come back to the office. So I've been in experiences in a Fortune 500, Fortune 50 company where it's a few thousand or a handful of thousand of people coming back to a single campus, but 30,000 is quite a different entity altogether.
Right.
And as you can imagine, one of the things that he shared, you have security requirements, clearance, pretty thorough check-ins to get into some of these facilities. And workplace availability is extremely limited, not to mention things like parking and operational details, but just getting through those security check-ins and gates is quite a bit. So as you can imagine, I think one thing on the RTO topic, from a facilities perspective, I think right away, those employees, if you're stuck in a security process for 30 minutes, before you even get into the elevator or the stairwell or the hallway to walk towards your workstation, you're probably already not in a great headspace, right?
Right.
And I think that's where FMs really need to start, is understanding this is where we have to be from the perspective of understanding what you're up against. And you mentioned 5 year anniversary. It's one of those things for me too, where I think you have to actually understand FMs, and this is before you even get to technology, right? What is the baseline expectation? And for me, 5 years ago, I had never not been in an office, right?
Right.
And so I think, but then you spent the last 5 years custom tailor fitting, outfitting your office to at home to be
Right.
as as a desirable of a workplace as it can be, and now you're competing against that, right, as a facility
Mhm.
manager. So it if this would have happened in April 2020 return to office, it would have been much different than March of 2025, right, where you've had 5 years to build that. So I always tell facility management folks and those in the commercial real estate space that we really need to start with a realistic baseline, that when you're thinking about your end user, that customer probably doesn't want to be in the office. So it's because of the last 5 years. So
Right.
understanding that, I think, is really important. And then we'll I know, get to unpack a little bit today some of the technology and tools that are out there. But I start at the highest level there and say, understand the mindset of your customer, and before you get into technology and start building process, and then really simply think about the point of entrance. When I worked at Target facilities, one of the things that we did, we had this thing that we called first impressions.
Mhm.
And when we would do visits with our technicians or vendor partners, before we even walked into the physical store, we would be scoring what it felt like as a guest coming into the shopping environment from the point of the parking lot. I think
Right.
facilities is like that too with this return to office. I was mentioning the federal government and one particular check-in process. But that's the same if you have turnstiles, if you have those revolving door badge readers. I think there's ways to get out ahead of that to a certain extent. And one of the things that you can use technology, but also understanding what those traffic patterns are, where you're going to have pinch points, and trying to get ahead of it from a facilities perspective. Just a couple of ways in addition to technology that you can take advantage of the tools that are there, but also trying to ease that transition. I think some of it just boils down to the mindset and some operational routines.
Right. As someone who has had, so I worked remotely for the last 3 years, and that's because I lived far away. It wasn't a COVID thing. But then when I moved closer to the office, I had to come back in, and man, am I crabby about it. I am cranky. And just when you mentioned like the parking aspect of it, my chest got tight. For someone who is a very bad driver, parking is like my worst nightmare. And so I can't imagine not having a parking lot or just having to like circle to find space. That adds so much time. But then, like you mentioned, with government facilities, there is a lot of security that goes into it. Um, how can they track this, track occupancy?
Yeah, so it's occupancy and then workplace usage and space are two kind of different paths. And so I think we talk about occupancy sometimes historically in the FM world, it's been go look at your badge readers, right? And then go
Hmm.
see where access control systems, where do you have folks coming in? How are they using that to be able to plan accordingly for work capacity? But occupancy is now shifted to usage of an area. And I think the industry a little bit is still playing catch up there. There's IoT sensors, of course, that are able to measure real-time desk usage, their meeting rooms, common area traffic that's out there. I know there's a new tool that's been coming around for a while that's aggregating data from sensors and things like
Right.
conference reservation systems that have been out there for a long time, but mapping trends to reflect peak days and when it's actually good to be in the office. So
Hmm.
they're making some headway on there. One of the things that I like to call out though, McKenna, is I think we paint a picture sometimes in the commercial real estate space that everything is a brand new building. Everything is a well standard building. Everything is LEED platinum. In our eyes, we that's maybe the utopian vision of commercial real estate. And
Right.
in reality, a lot of times what we're coming back to are offices that the average U.S. building office is over 50 years old, and
Right.
the majority. So I think that's where it's really back to the question of saying how do we track occupancy? You may have to be a little bit more creative and bolt on different parts of a system versus saying I'm going to replace my building automation system altogether. It's more of finding ways within security, cybersecurity provisions, and what your company will allow, of course, from an oversight perspective, to bring in some of those sensors and do things a little bit at a time. And back to the beginning, I think you just have to start with the end in mind, right? What are you trying to get a little bit at a time to track occupancy? And there's a number of different benefits that you can get from the data, but I think it's being able to say what can I actually accomplish and what's the desired outcome here. So I read recently that 80% of the companies are still using badge readers and Wi-Fi data, of course, from where you're plugging in or your LAN data to monitor attendance. So I think again, just being able to level set and say you're not going to get space optimization data from that, but you can at least make incremental progress towards the goal there.
Right. But do you ever think that like could hinder on someone's privacy or make the employees feel like they're being watched at all?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I think that's possible. And not to ding the prop tech sector because I think there's a lot of exciting tools. But one of the things that I've even seen that gave me that pause, McKenna, is that there are some, and I couldn't tell you the number, but I know that some companies have rolled out an integration monitoring employee retention through their HR system and combining that with data from building satisfaction. So
Right.
there things like, of course, air quality and measuring those types of things are great. But then if you're giving low scores on the building, tying that back to an employee's overall retention score, satisfaction score, facilities is getting much more data, but they're becoming much more visible
Hmm.
from an actual standpoint of how are you impacting the employee experience, which bringing it back to a really personal experience level. So yeah, I think that every company has different levels of privacy, when it comes to what's allowed. But I do think that to some extent, it's a little bit different when they're coming in and they're monitoring where you're at in the building versus did you scan in. Now it's where did you actually sit, and sometimes that's not data that's to the employee. But again, there are some examples of where it actually is getting down to the employee level and what you're saying about your experience.
That that makes me nervous. that that almost seems like Big Brother esque a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that. I think that's a common fear, and I couldn't tell you that that's something that will completely evaporate. I think we're in a period of time right now where there's rapid change, rapid adoption.
Hmm.
There's a quote, McKenna, that I think a lot of times is referenced with in periods of change in culture or politics, but it goes that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there's weeks when decades happen. And
Truly.
I think right now we're in that latter phase where AI in smart buildings and SaaS platforms that have been out there for a long time, those were just things that were a figment of our imagination. We saw them at workplace conferences and CMMS conferences, and we saw these things, but they were never impacting somebody like myself. And then all of a sudden, how are you using artificial intelligence today in your job? It's just here, right?
Right.
And then being careful of privacy with certain types of things. And I think education is really good there. So I do think it's good to have some cautiousness around tools and data gathering and understanding things like privacy policies. And I think that's where companies can really put themselves in the forefront from a facilities perspective, making sure your teams are part of that solution and are not being taken off guard by it. We have to move out of we're just maintenance people that are now portfolio managers, right? Or
Hmm.
we got to be more to an extent thought leaders, some research people, and now you carry a little bit of a IT and cybersecurity tool in your tool belt versus just the things like wrenches and hammers that have been there previously.
Right. I like what you said about just how much technology has innovated these last few years because I believe they said that like the first 3 months of the pandemic, we had 2 years worth of technological innovation. And just in the last 5 years, just to see how much we have grown, do you think we would still be in the place that we are today, technology wise, if we didn't have the pandemic?
That's a fascinating question. Probably not. And so I think where my mind goes, McKenna, is thinking about even things like in restaurants and grocery stores, right? I
Hmm.
know my wife now routinely does grocery drive up at
Right.
places, right? And that was never a thing where you were doing grocery pickup 5 years ago. We go to some of my kids' favorite drive-through places, and there's multiple drive-through lanes. There's people out there with tablets taking orders. You're doing things ahead of time, pick up, or you're putting your order in before you get to a location, and then you're coming to a designated pickup area. I think that's so. I would say no is my hunch is that that moment in time was a big paradigm shift, and some businesses. I think this is where facilities, to bring it back to that for a second, we can really take some inspiration for some in this space, how others, if it's in the restaurant or food industry, or we're talking about groceries and retailers, we can take some inspiration from how they have innovated through periods of change. And I don't think we're coming back to the same office, or at least office expectations based on what
Right.
others have been through.
Right. How can we get more people on board with this technological innovation? As we know, facilities management tends to be an older demographic, so technology is usually met with a lot of apprehension. How can we get people to like it?
Absolutely. That's absolutely a good point and true. And my experience is it's funny because I got into some of the facilities technology because I felt like I wasn't a tradesperson, right? And so it
Okay.
was just we were drawn into it on the facilities side. looking at budgets, looking at maintenance efficiency tools, reporting. I got thrown into the deep end. One of my first facility roles, I was an analyst and a CMMS administrator, and it was a sink or swim role. It was just figured out, and I think ended up going through an RFP, a lot of different things there. But what that story allowed me to do at a mid-sized company was go out to be really curious and then figure things out. And I think that so curiosity, I used to have a mentor tell me that that was the most important trait for someone. And I
Hmm.
think it's really important in facilities because think about a lot of facilities is trying to root cause what's the actual issue. You know,
Right.
the leak is usually not what's most visible to the eye. It started somewhere through the conduit, up the pipe, somewhere else. If it was from the roof, it was tied in the ductwork somewhere. That's same thing happens with comfort and temperature control things. It's usually not at the point that you're feeling it. It's further down the line. And I think
Hmm.
that goes back to curiosity. So I absolutely would say that the call it old school, air quotes here, folks that have been in facilities, we're at a transition point for that group who's facilities talking point. I think Facilities Net has put out publications on this. What a common point in the industry for the last 5, 10 years has been we're having an aging workforce that is going to retire. So
Right.
I would say we're at a pivot point, and I love this question because as I've thought about it, there are you can bring in people like me that don't have a trades background. I was listening to somebody that's in the facility space now, workplace experience thought leader for a big commercial real estate firm. He came from research and so had no facilities interest whatsoever, but saw IoT, saw smart buildings, saw all this technology coming in and said, "Hey, that's really fascinating. You can bring in some people from completely disparate sectors to facilities and I think
Hmm.
capitalize on some of that technology. And I think we're always going to need, would certainly not want to demean tradespeople. We need them more than ever. But I
Right.
think there's going to be an ability for us to increase the funnel that maybe traditionally was in here. So yeah, it's a good one to unpack.
Technology just needs to be a tool in the tool belt. It doesn't need to fully replace. I don't think technology will ever fully replace tradespeople. There's no way that, I mean, maybe a robot could eventually hang drywall, but it's not going to be able to fix a leak or unclog a toilet, like you said. It's a pretty technology proof industry, but it will make people's lives easier if they continue to embrace it.
100%. And I think, McKenna, that's where we need to start talking about as folks in the facility space. Let's start highlighting the benefits because I think if
Hmm.
all you're talking about right now with a facilities person, if they are a tradesperson or if they're new to the industry, is change and change is scary, we need to start saying the carrot isn't necessarily job retention. It needs to be let's get you better productivity. Let's make your life better through this process. So if you're running around as a maintenance person, floor to floor, workstation to workstation, different ends of the buildings, these huge campus environments, you can't be all places at once, right?
Right.
So let's highlight things like cost savings. If that's important to you, let's talk about cost savings. We know if you're using less of a building, in theory, you should be able to see some energy efficiencies and some savings there. How can you do that? Other companies have then implemented things like smart systems and we talked about building automation a bit to help prioritize. But now you bring in artificial intelligence and it's seeing some of those trends and doing that for you. But really simply, I'd be talking to my technicians about let's just plan better, right? If
Right.
we have things like hybrid work schedules, how can we then take what used to be a maintenance window? And well, I came from a financial environment where it was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Anytime we had to do any production maintenance had to be overnight. Well, no
Right.
one wanted to do that, as you can imagine, right?
Mhm.
Nobody was jumping in line to say I want to do overnight maintenance. But if now you have very low attendance trends on a Friday, for example, can you move a maintenance window to a Friday potentially for some of these things? How can you plan better? Savings is certainly part of that, but I think you can look to optimize your facility staff. And I think, like you mentioned, bringing some of those benefits to the forefront in these conversations help people move out of the I'm afraid of it and saying, oh, that makes a little bit of sense. Maybe I'll dig deeper.
Mhm. So as people are returning to the office, how do you think that's going to change facilities work?
Yeah, well, I just mentioned one thing there, which is that hybrid schedule. And I think that's already a difference that we're seeing, is that it's you used to have in a world that I came from, your facility staff was basically 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and then you'd have on-call people, of course, 24/7. But I think that's going to look different now. There may have to be some staggered scheduling. I saw this in my former life at a large bank in a financial institution where we had to start making adjustments to routines, checks, if it's, security process, or if you're talking about comfort check-ins. What are you doing throughout the day to make sure that the production time, that window now, is really, really important to leaders? I had a
Hmm.
funny story, McKenna, once where I was doing a planned building evacuation fire drill, and we had communicated this with the executives at the facility, and the number two in the company passed me in the stairwell, which was always a bit of a nerve-wracking interaction, right? Just because it's a very powerful person there, and it was my client.
Right.
And I was going up to check the top floor. He was walking out with his staff to exit the building according to the procedures. And we had communicated this in advance to him. We had said, this is what's coming. It's going to be this amount of time. And he made a passing comment to me that it was a joke, but he said, "Hey, Alex, make sure you do this quick, because I know how much money we're losing being out of the building every 5 minutes." And he told me the exact number.
Oh my
And
God.
and so it was one of
So
those
much
where
pressure.
right, right. And so, it was in good spirits when he mentioned it, but one of those things where I think how things change. Now I apply that to today, where it's you're in the office for more limited times. And think about the RTO buzzwords, McKenna, that everyone's using at large companies, small companies. It's collaboration, productivity, efficiency, communication, culture. It's really easy for employees to get jaded when they come in. And if you have an unplanned building malfunction, you have a smoke alarm go off, you have something, a sensor that's bad that ends up dumping your building of people, and you lose productivity, or you can't find a parking spot and you get stuck at a security gate, or your badge expired and you can't get into the building. Those types of things, I think right now, back to the question of like, how does this change for facilities? I think you have to be on your game in a way that you didn't necessarily have to be to the same level in the past, based on
Hmm.
office productivity windows are so much smaller. Therefore, any lost time is that much more impactful.
Right. I also think people may understand the impact of facilities a lot more than they ever did pre-COVID, because I don't think I would have ever asked about indoor air quality before this happened. And how can facilities managers, you spoke a little bit about comfort check-ins, but how can they like ensure the safety of everyone in the office?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think it's a good point. It's definitely one where if you have those, I'm at this point in time, almost all buildings that are in a return to office environment have something like a building automation system. There are different ways that you can measure air quality without tying that in there, but I think in a perfect world, you are using the systems, the tools that you have in place, and you're proactively measuring things like temperature, air quality. You can get into pollutant levels and IoT sensors, CO2. So I think that is important, and we have a more informed consumer as an end customer that's using the facilities, and being able to proactively identify that. In the past, it would be you essentially, you may do your checks, you're doing temperature checks, and you're walking floors, but you may not react to something until you got a work order from a customer, which is by definition reactive, right? The
Mhm.
proactive side is using those sensors, putting in different levels to check, and then even looking at things like we talked about unoccupied spaces versus occupied. Is it just that that part of the building is inconvenient, or why we got to make sure that from a facilities perspective, if it is things like comfort, are people avoiding that area because it's the temperature's not where it should be, or the air quality, or there's a smell, or whatever it is. There's things that I think you should be checking, and you can use tools to proactively identify that, or even things like cleanliness. I think you mentioned robotics and potentially cleaning. That's out there, but also using things like sensors, even in restroom checks, and soap and paper products, trying to be, and even trash sensors, so things aren't overflowing. facilities right now can use those tools and implement them in conjunction with a service provider or with their building systems to be more proactive. And then I think hopefully you're being less reactive from the point of responding to customer requests, but you're more meeting them before they even happen.
Mm. I guess this is really changing my mind about having to be in the office because as someone who re- had to return or just had to be in the office in general, um, I did not want to be. I felt like my my job could have been done at home since I had been doing it for that long. But then also I became such a homebody that I was like, I just like being there. But now going to the office every day, I when you were talking, I was noticing like, oh, every time I come here, my trash can is empty. And I'm here twice a week, and the bathrooms are always clean. There's always extra toilet paper, and just stuff like that really does matter because I know where the toilet paper is at my house. I keep my house clean and comfortable and at a good temperature. I do have to have a blanket here because it gets cold, but if it wasn't up to my standards, I think I would be complaining a lot more
Mhm.
about returning.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think it's that goes back to that paradigm shift, right? It used to just be an office where you came and did work. If you were in the office prior to March of 2020, the expectation level is not the same as it today as it was then. And so return to
Mhm.
office, to your point, I've said before, McKenna, I think it's a much more personal experience now when you're there. And so that I think when I opened just talking about understanding that from a facilities perspective, not combating that because it's even the most proactive facilities management organizations with all the tools in the world, you're still going to have some service recovery go on. But I think if you are not in a return to office environment right now, or if you're hybrid, I saw a recent study from KPMG that came out that said 80% of leaders are saying that they expect to be back full time in the office within the next 3 years. So I think understanding that where you are today is somewhat of an evolution to where you will be. You're evolving towards 5 days, or maybe you're 0 days in the office right now. You haven't returned. It's going to be hybrid. And I think just using every opportunity, every moment in time to say, are we moving closer to what full capacity would look like in this particular facility? So it's a really good point. And I think that having the mindset of I need to make this a personal, inviting environment. But
Mhm.
on the other end of it, the other way of looking at it is just trying to not be the reason that somebody doesn't come, right? And I
Right.
think that's where you want to when people are there, you want them to enjoy it. But once they're there, facilities isn't in control of bringing people to the building, but you are pretty influential when it comes to what is the experience that you're going to have when you're there.
Right. And it's all about like the reputation too.
Absolutely.
Mhm. But what are other like technological amenities that that facilities can provide people so that they come to the office so that they're willing to return?
Yeah, well, one thing I think is amenities that we haven't jumped into as of yet, and I think that's a lot of companies. I heard a great quote one time where it's been mandates, and then now it's becoming magnets. So, what types
Mhm.
of things can we bring you back to the office with? So, a lot of employers are doing things like increased catering, healthy food options, if there's pantry operations. I mentioned on a previous discussion that one of the things that I saw a Midwest company was doing was this concierge service where they were trying to, I mean, that's a different level completely, but they were, "Hey, if you have packages at your house, we'll send someone to pick them up so you can stay here." Different things like childcare services, some of those things have been around for a while, but I think companies are really trying to have a broader variety of amenities that keep people there, and then you can have productive time as opposed to worrying about other things. And one of the items that I was surprised by is even with companies that have a full service cafeteria, one of the shifts has been that employees are now even in this specific survey said if you have a full service cafeteria, 50% of employees had moved to a delivery or takeout option even with a full service cafeteria. So
Oh.
it just and that's not necessarily a technology, but I think an amenity then becomes you don't resist that trend, but you try to optimize your food service operations. And then how do you make your entry reception area, security check-in, where delivery drivers are coming in more accessible so that you're not slowing down building traffic? I think there are ways that facility managers can look at trends and even, of course, get some of that from if it's badge data or occupancy sensors. But a lot of amenities that are out there, and I think I'd even mention things like fitness centers using sensors now so you don't show up and say, oh, it's too full. You can look at that ahead of time and see what the usage rates are. And I
Right.
think those types of things, even on a non-FM side, if I'm a hiring manager, if I'm a team leader in an office scenario, I want my team to be there together. A lot of these hybrid environments don't even stipulate what days to be in the office. So if you have to be there 3 days, pick your days. Well, I think some leaders are pivoting towards let's have a team meeting on this day. Here's when this room is available. And there's a lot of technology right now that's deployed where they are combining those different sensors, occupancy data, scheduling tools, and even using things like floor plan layouts to say, this is available at this time. Let's all be there. And I think collaboration will improve, but we're still in that uphill climb right now. We're trying to figure out how does this all going to level out? And I think we're still going through the transition.
Right. But I know that you've talked about workplace sensors a little bit, but with that AI driven analytics, how does that create a more adaptive and efficient workspace?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I made I think I made reference to one point there talking about how AI can even use things like temperature, but it's what's amazing, McKenna, with seeing AI is it's really it's tying things together for you. So
Hmm.
now this does require this is I'm jumping a couple steps ahead, and I think you always have to take a step back and say, if I have a bunch of disparate systems, do they all speak to one another? Do they have the same language when it comes to what is a building called? What is a room called? What is the work order cadence the same? I think when you're bringing technology together from a bunch of different sources, if it's APIs or if it's bolt-on sensors, they have to be talking the same language for AI to be able to produce what more than just a suggestion, but an actual recommendation that you can use for your building. So there is some process work that has to take place ahead of time for what it's worth. But I think AI takes operations and experience and helps you bring it together in more of a blended environment. So it's a much more FM can be a really prominent strategic part of the organization if you're leveraging insights that would otherwise take you hours and hours to pull together. AI is pulling things from sensors and saying, hey, over here, look at this red flag or look at this, it's identifying things for you. So you're not having to do that. And even just as a research tool, you're not having, if you have a to root cause an HVAC situation, or if you have some of these large plant environments, you can go out there and look with the serial number and the make and model and find diagnostics, find common problems. You can jump ahead of things so much more quickly from a root cause and problem solving scenario. So it's not just that it's being used for sensors and workplace things, it's also on the troubleshooting side, which is really comes back to time efficiency for FM professionals. So AI is really exciting. And I think right now it's finally I mentioned at the beginning, it's just here, right? And so I think
Hmm.
facilities leaders need to be early adopters as best they can to use it for those types of tools.
Right. Do you think that since facilities managers tend to work so behind the scenes that as more people are coming into the office, that we should just like introduce them to people just so that they can put a face to a name or just so that they know who these people are?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things that I first wrote down and thinking about return to office is just being present, being visible. So
Hmm.
absolutely, we a lot of times have things where I know in my former organization, we were talking about return to office, what needed to be there. We think about signage and accessibility and how can people get into the building efficiency? Do they know where to go? Design and layout. One of the biggest comforts to an employee, especially if think about somebody, I was somebody that was there pre-COVID in the office. So I
Hmm.
kind of knew the role. For people that were hired, there's thousands and thousands of people that were hired during COVID and then came to the office for the first time. And
Right.
so that's where that facility manager that a coordinator, somebody that's an engineer, that knows the building, knows how it operates. They know the building better if they're in-house or outsourced than their end user client. So I totally agree with that. And I think that's a really, really important thing is the human element. While there's a lot of technology here, the human element there, that's the culture that facilities can help provide. And ultimately, facilities holds everything together, right? It's like you have a hand in technology, you have a hand in communication, you have a hand in what is workplace safety and comfort. And then it's like I haven't even mentioned maintenance, right? There's
Right.
all of these things that people will look to you. And one last stat for you. I had been researching some different things about how was technology being deployed, and I think a really shocking thing that came to me was that most companies, even with sensors and technology that's out there, they're still using frontline employees in the facilities and real estate space to validate findings from AI or from sensors. So they're still going to that person that's on site, Mackenna, and saying, "Hey, does this check out to you? Does this? I know you know the facility. I got this
Right.
report. Can you smell test this?" And I think that just goes back to they are really the glue to the operation, whether they're in-house or it's a provider. And I think visibility, being there as a human, is more important now than ever before.
hmm Because facilities matters, and these people matter. And while I wish the pandemic never happened, obviously, it's nice that because of it, facility managers are being recognized and they actually know what facility or people know what facilities management is now.
I think that's really well said. 100% agree.
Thank you. Well, that is all the sorry, I feel like I just shouted, but that is all that I have for you today, Alex. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I think I would agree with your last comment. It's an exciting time to be in the space. And one of the things that I get to work on today in my job at Fine Tune is taking advantage of the tools that are out there, leveraging if it's software that's CMMS that's out there. For us, we have proprietary auditing technology that then we use to audit clients' invoices on the real estate side of things to make sure you're in an optimal deal and it sticks. And so I think right now we are really passionate about helping facility management teams that are going through a transition time and RTO. And I think it's an exciting time for the industry. And for us, it's a great time to be able to meet like-minded people, Mackenna, like you, and talk to thought leaders in the space. And exciting time to be in FM. And I am really excited. One of the things we referenced about the future trajectory, about because of all this change,
Mhm.
it opens up a broader spectrum for facilities professionals to both come into it and then to go out from the space. So it's been great talking with you, and thanks for so much for the time.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the Facilities in Focus podcast. Facilities in Focus is a product of the facility market, which houses FacilitiesNet, building operating management, facilities maintenance decisions, and healthcare facilities today. Thank you to our sound and video editor, Paul Ellertson. Thank you to Morgan Johnson for designing our logo. Thank you to Dan Welton, Dave Lubach, Dan Hounsell, Jeff Warden, Jill McDermott, and everyone else at Trade Press Media Group. For comments, or if you are interested in being a guest on Facilities in Focus, please email us at fnpodcast@tradepress.com.